The traffic on Atlantic Avenue in Boston was a relentless, honking beast. Inside the climate-controlled sanctuary of his Tesla Model S, Julian Croft tapped his fingers impatiently on the sleek dashboard. He had just ended a conference call with his Singaporean investors, a multi-million-dollar deal dismissed with the cool efficiency that had become his trademark. "No, we're not renegotiating the terms," he'd stated, his voice flat and final. "If they can't meet the valuation by morning, terminate the offer. Find me another target." He disconnected the call, the sudden silence in the car, a stark contrast to the city's chaotic symphony. It was in that moment of forced stillness that his gaze, trained to spot market inefficiencies, was caught by a mundane scene across the street. In front of an old brick building, a woman with auburn hair was kneeling on the sidewalk, talking to two small children, a boy and a girl, who were tugging at her coat. She spoke to them with a calm patience, her hands gently adjusting their small jackets against the crisp autumn air. The world around Julian, with its deadlines, stock tickers and ambitions, seemed to dissolve into a blur. The air in his lungs felt suddenly thin. He swallowed hard, his heart giving a painful lurch in his chest. "Chloe," he whispered to the windshield, the name a ghost he hadn't summoned in years. It had been 8 years. 8 years, 4 months, and a handful of days since he'd last seen her, but time hadn't eroded the details. It was her, unmistakably. The same delicate profile he had so often admired as she sketched in her notebook. The same way a strand of her auburn hair escaped to frame her face. But it wasn't just her that paralyzed him. It was the children. 2 small figures with light brown hair, perhaps 6 or 7 years old. The boy, even from across the street, had his exact jawline, his brow. The girl had his eyes, a deep, piercing blue that seemed to hold an intensity far beyond her years. The resemblance wasn't a fleeting impression, it was a genetic signature, an irrefutable truth stamped onto those 2 innocent faces. "It can't be," he murmured, his mouth suddenly dry, the metallic taste of shock on his tongue. A furious honk from the car behind him jolted him back to reality. The traffic had moved, and he was now the obstruction. He accelerated, the car gliding forward on autopilot, but his eyes remained fixed on the scene, as if tethered by an invisible string. His brain, a machine for calculating risk and projecting outcomes, was now racing uncontrollably through a past he had meticulously buried. He remembered the breakup, a cold, clinical conversation where he had accused her of not understanding the sacrifices required for success. He remembered her calls in the weeks that followed, the messages he'd read and deleted, the final decisive block on all social media, an act of self-preservation he'd justified as necessary to maintain his focus. A cold, overwhelming certainty began to settle in his chest, displacing all the air. This was not a coincidence. This was fate delivering a long overdue invoice. In a move that defied his entire logical, calculated nature, Julian swerved the car abruptly. The Tesla cut across 2 lanes of traffic, eliciting a chorus of horns and curses he barely registered. He pulled into a loading zone, the hazard lights blinking like a beacon of his inner turmoil, and leapt out of the car. The brisk Boston air hit him, but he didn't feel it. He crossed the street, his expensive shoes pounding the pavement, cars braking and swerving around him. His universe had shrunk to that sidewalk, that brick building, that woman. "Chloe!" he called out, his voice hoarse, louder than he intended. She turned, and the recognition in her eyes was a flash of lightning, quickly followed by a storm of panic. The children stopped their tugging, their curious eyes fixed on the tall, unfamiliar man approaching with such urgency. "Julian?" she said, her voice a thread, as she rose to her feet and, in a primal, instinctive motion, positioned herself in front of her children, a human shield against a ghost from the past. He stopped a few feet away, breathless, his gaze shifting desperately between her face, now more mature and etched with a strength he didn't recognize, and the 2 small figures peering out from behind her. The boy watched him with a serious expression that was a mirror of his own. "Are they your children?" he managed to ask, his voice failing, the question a useless formality in the face of the crushing evidence. Her confirmation came with a firm yes, but he saw her hands tremble. The boy, bolder, stepped forward from behind his mother's protection. "Who are you?" he asked, his gaze direct, unwavering, a perfect miniature of his own audacity. Julian felt the ground give way beneath him. "I'm an old friend of your mum's," he replied, the words feeling hollow and false. The tension was a physical thing, palpable in the cool city air. He needed to know. "How old are they?" The question came out as a plea. Chloe hesitated, a silent battle raging in her eyes. "7, she finally answered. The word landed on him with the weight of a judgment, confirming the cruel arithmetic his mind had already performed. He needed more answers, an explanation for the 7-year abyss. But Chloe was already retreating, guiding the children toward the entrance of the building. "Please, go," she pleaded, her voice now laced with a long-held anger. The heavy wooden door closed, creating a final barrier. He stood on the noisy sidewalk, the man who had everything, but had just discovered he had lost his entire world. He could see the silhouettes of the three of them in the lobby, Chloe kneeling again to speak to her children, protecting them from the world, and most of all, from him. He had children, twins. And for 7 long, empty, unforgivable years, he had never known. Julian remained frozen on the sidewalk, a spectator to his own life shattering on the other side of a glass door. He watched as Chloe led the children deeper into the building's lobby, their small silhouettes swallowed by the shadows. The cacophony of Atlantic Avenue, the blaring horns, the distant wail of a siren, all of it faded into a dull, meaningless hum. His phone buzzed relentlessly in his jacket pocket, a call from his Singaporean counterparts that on any other day would have commanded his absolute attention. Now, it felt like a message from a different reality, a life that was no longer his. The image of the 2 children's faces, a mirror of his own, was seared into his mind, a permanent brand that redefined his past and obliterated his future. He returned to his car like an automaton, moving through the bustling crowd without seeing a single face. A parking ticket was tucked under his windshield wiper. He plucked it off without reaction, got into the driver's seat and sat motionless, his hands gripping the steering wheel as the city's relentless traffic flowed around him. "My children," he murmured into the car's silent interior, the words feeling alien, as if spoken by another man about another life. The sheer scale of the revelation was a tidal wave, and he was drowning. The night was a long and torturous vigil. His penthouse apartment overlooking the Boston Harbor, a sleek, minimalist space designed to impress and project power, had never felt so empty, so hostile. The floor-to-ceiling windows that usually offered a triumphant view of the city now seemed to mock his profound isolation. He paced back and forth, unable to sit still, his mind replaying every second of the encounter in a torturous loop. The panic in Chloe's eyes, her protective stance, and above all, those 2 pairs of blue eyes, one defiant, the other shy and questioning. Every detail was a shard of glass twisting in his gut. The next day, he did the unthinkable, something that hadn't happened since he founded his venture capital firm. He cleared his entire schedule. The company, the empire he had built with obsessive dedication, the ambition that had justified every sacrifice, suddenly seemed secondary, a fragile house of cards against the hurricane that had erupted inside him. Sitting in his home office, the city sprawling beneath him, he began a frantic search for Chloe. Social media was a dead end. She had either blocked him or vanished from the digital world, a fortress of privacy he himself had forced her to build. Swallowing his pride, a bitter taste in his mouth, he reached out to a mutual friend from college, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. He fabricated a story about a legal document, a loose end from the past, and after an awkward conversation, he obtained her phone number. The text exchange was tense and brief, each word heavy with the bitterness of 7 years of silence. He pleaded for a meeting, appealing to his right to know about the children. Her reply came like a judgment, cold and digital. "Rights! You forfeited your rights when you erased me from your life." Still, after an insistence that bordered on desperation, she relented. The meeting was set for the next day, at a neutral coffee shop in the South End, a public space she deliberately chose to feel safe. Julian arrived an hour early, his anxiety a stark contrast to the steely composure he projected in boardrooms. He sat at a table in the back, his heart pounding with a violence he'd never felt before a multi-million-dollar negotiation. When Chloe walked in, precisely on time, he noticed the changes time and life had etched upon her. There was a strength in her posture, a maturity in her gaze that the dreamy art student he'd known did not possess. Life had forged her, and he had played no part in it. The conversation was direct, stripped of any pleasantries. He asked why she hadn't told him. Her answer was a painful, detailed list of her frustrated attempts, the dozens of calls that went to voicemail before he blocked her number, the emails that vanished into the abyss of an inbox he never checked, the 2 visits to his imposing office where his assistant had treated her with icy disdain, barring her as if she were a threat. "What else did you want me to do, Julian? Beg on my knees in front of your building?" she asked, her voice steady, but her eyes flashing with the pain of an old humiliation. He felt disarmed, guilt a physical weight on his shoulders. It was then that he learned their names, Liam and Olivia, and he also learned of Olivia's condition, a chronic bronchitis, a lingering consequence of her being born prematurely, which made her vulnerable to respiratory infections and required constant vigilance. Every word from Chloe was another brick in the wall of his regret, a monument to his own negligence. He asked for a chance, not for himself, but for the children. The skepticism on Chloe's face was almost palpable, a barrier built from the bricks of his own past actions. "I don't want you coming around out of guilt and then disappearing when the novelty wears off," she warned, her voice firm. "They don't deserve another abandonment." He promised he wouldn't disappear, a vow made with a conviction he didn't know he possessed, a strength that came not from business logic, but from a newly awakened primal instinct. The deal was struck. A casual meeting at the Boston Common on Sunday, so he could be introduced as an old friend. It was a pittance, almost nothing, but for Julian, it was the only door opening into a universe he desperately needed to enter. He watched her leave, a whirlwind of emotions consuming him. That night, the ruthless CEO from the covers of business magazines, the man who prided himself on his emotional control, wept for the first time in years. He wept for the lost time, for the wrong choices, and for the 2 little strangers who were, undeniably, a part of him. In the days that followed, Julian immersed himself in an obsessive investigation, not into emerging tech markets, but into the life that had been denied to him. He leveraged his resources not to acquire companies, but to acquire information. He discreetly hired a private investigator, an act that in any other context would have felt like a gross invasion of privacy, but now felt like a desperate necessity to fill the gaping holes in his own history. The reports that came back painted a picture of a modest and resilient life. Chloe worked as a freelance illustrator from home, a career choice that allowed her to care for the children. They lived in a rented apartment in Jamaica Plain, a quiet, leafy neighborhood far from the ostentatious luxury he inhabited. There was no record of any serious relationships since they had parted ways. Her life appeared to have been entirely dedicated to the children. In his office, with the Boston skyline as his backdrop, Julian analyzed the information as if it were a financial statement. "So there's no man in her life?" he asked the investigator, his voice tense. The answer was negative. Her routine was a constant cycle: work, Olivia's doctor appointments, school, home. On weekends it was parks or free museum days with the children. Every detail was a silent testament to her dedication, and every testament was a fresh stab of guilt for him. The investigator also provided him with copies of the birth certificates. There were the names Liam Miller and Olivia Miller, Chloe's last name alone. The space for the father's name was a blank, legal and existential void that stared back at him from the page. The feeling of being a ghost in his own lineage was overwhelming. The memory of their breakup returned with painful clarity. He had been at the peak of his firm's expansion, working 16-hour days, fueled by caffeine and ambition. Chloe had complained about his absence, about the unfulfilled promises. The final straw was when he cancelled, for the third time, a trip they had planned. "You have to choose, Julian," she had said. "I can't compete with your company forever." And he, blinded by the glare of imminent success, had chosen. He thought it was an ultimatum, unnecessary drama. Never, in his wildest scenarios, did he imagine she might be carrying his children. The meeting at the Boston Common on Sunday was his only chance. He arrived an hour early, as nervous as a teenager on a first date. He chose casual clothes, trying to erase the image of the billionaire CEO. He sat on a bench near the frog pond, watching families pass by, a universe of normalcy he had never been a part of. When he saw Chloe and the children approaching, his heart hammered against his ribs. They were real. Those were his children. He walked towards them, trying to force a calm smile. "Hi," he said, his voice a little hoarser than usual. "Look, Mom, it's the man from the street," exclaimed Liam, the more outgoing of the two, pointing at him without ceremony. Olivia, the shyer one, hid partially behind her mother, peering at him with her large blue eyes. Chloe formally introduced them, explaining that Julian was an old friend of Mommy's. The first hour was an awkward, stilted dance. Julian tried to find a way to connect, but he felt like an actor on an unfamiliar stage. He watched them play, memorizing every gesture, every laugh. He saw the way Liam always made sure his sister didn't wander too far, and how Olivia, despite her delicate health, played with a determination that moved him. Chloe kept a safe distance, an attentive observer, ready to intervene at any moment. It was Liam who broke the ice. He ran up to him, breathless, holding a small toy boat. "Can you fix it?" he asked, showing him a sail that had come loose. Julian, who was used to fixing complex financial systems, felt completely unprepared. He took the small boat with a care that surprised himself. "I think so," he said. "Let's see." He sat on the grass, and with the help of Olivia, who approached curiously, they managed to reattach the sail. The grateful smile Liam gave him was more valuable than any annual bonus he had ever received. That small repair seemed to break down a barrier. The children, especially Liam, began to include him in their games. He found himself pushing a swing, helping to build a castle of leaves, and even participating in an imaginary race. He was clumsy, out of practice, but for the first time in years, he felt a pure joy, untethered from any goal or result. Time flew by. When Chloe approached to say it was time to go, he felt a pang of disappointment. To his surprise, it was she who extended the invitation. "They need to have lunch. If you want, you can join us. Nothing fancy, just some pasta at home." He accepted immediately, his heart pounding at the opportunity. Chloe's apartment in Jamaica Plain was cozy and full of life, despite its modesty. The walls of the living room were a children's art gallery, with colorful drawings and photos of the twins at every stage of their growth. Julian studied each image, desperately trying to absorb the years he had lost. The lunch was surprisingly normal. The children, now more at ease, asked questions. "Do you have a giant TV?" asked Liam. "Are you rich like a superhero?" wanted to know Olivia. Julian answered honestly but simply, trying to connect with their world. That day, he wasn't CEO Julian Croft. He was just Julian, Mommy's friend, a man desperately trying to find his place in a family he didn't even know he had. When he left late that afternoon, he felt exhausted, but in a new and good way. That Sunday had been the most meaningful day of his adult life, and he knew with absolute certainty that it was just the beginning. That Sunday marked the beginning of a slow, profound transformation in Julian's life. The weekend meetings became a sacred routine. He took them on simple outings, a bike ride along the Charles River, an afternoon at the Museum of Science, a picnic in the Arnold Arboretum. Chloe usually accompanied them, maintaining an emotional distance, but observing every interaction with watchful eyes. She was the guardian of this fragile family ecosystem, and he knew he had to earn her trust as much as the children's. In the following weeks, Julian began to dismantle the architecture of his old life. He delegated responsibilities he once considered non-negotiable, shocked his partners by turning down international trips, and started conducting meetings via video from home whenever possible. His team noticed the change, his once laser-like focus now divided, but he offered only vague explanations about important personal matters. The relationship with Liam, the natural leader, and Olivia, the sensitive observer, deepened with each meeting. He learned about their favorite cartoon heroes, their preferred foods, their nighttime fears. It was on a rainy afternoon, confined to Chloe's small apartment, that an unexpected moment occurred. Julian was helping the children with a complex puzzle on the living room floor. Olivia, frustrated with a piece that wouldn't fit, began to cry silently, tears streaming down her face. "Hey, no need to cry," Julian said softly, moving closer. "Sometimes the hardest things are the most worthwhile in the end." The little girl looked up, her vulnerability exposed. "Do you ever cry?" she asked, with a surprising seriousness for her 7 years. The question caught him off guard. "Yes," Julian answered, with an honesty he rarely used. "Adults cry too." "Why?" Olivia insisted. Julian thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes for sadness, and sometimes for regret. When we realize we've done something wrong and hurt someone we love." Olivia stared at him intently, as if processing every word. "Have you ever hurt someone you love?" she asked. "Yes," Julian admitted, his voice thick with emotion, the weight of that confession hitting him hard. "And I regret it very much." The little girl nodded, as if she had gotten the answer she needed, and turned her attention back to the puzzle. But something had changed. A small bridge of trust had been built over an abyss of silence. As the months passed, Julian's presence became a constant. It was during one of Olivia's routine checkups, while they waited for the results of a lung function test, that Chloe dropped the bomb. "I got a job offer," she said, her voice neutral as she watched the children play in the waiting room. "An animation studio in Vancouver. The salary is triple what I make here. They want me to lead their new character design department." Julian felt as if the floor had vanished from under him. "Vancouver, another country. You're not thinking of accepting, are you?" he asked, panic rising in his throat. "I'm thinking about it very hard, Julian," she replied. "It would be an incredible opportunity for me and for them, a safer life, better schools. But what about us?" He hesitated. "I just found them. You can't take them to the other side of the continent." "I spent 7 years raising our children alone, Julian," she reminded him, her voice firm. "I can't dismiss their future because you've decided to show up now." Before he could respond, the doctor called them in. The news was good. Olivia's condition was well managed. On the way home, the silence in the car was heavy. It was Liam who broke it. "Mom, what's Vancouver?" The innocent question landed like a stone in the silence. Chloe explained about the job offer. "But what about Julian?" Olivia asked. "Can't he come with us?" The childish logic was brutal and direct. "Julian has his job here," Chloe explained. "Then I don't want to go," Liam declared, crossing his arms. "Me neither," echoed Olivia. That night, the conversation in Chloe's small kitchen was long and difficult. "They've grown attached to you faster than I imagined," she admitted. "What are we going to do?" Julian took a deep breath. "I have an idea," he said. Accept the job. Go to Vancouver and leave the children with me, at least at first. Let me take care of them while you get settled. I can hire help. I can do this." The proposal was insane, but in Chloe's eyes, he saw a flicker of consideration. The plan, as crazy as it seemed, took shape. Chloe accepted the job, and they filed for temporary custody for Julian. The farewell at the airport was the hardest thing he had ever done. The children cried, clinging to their mother. "It's just for a few months," she repeated like a mantra. "It'll be okay," he promised, trying to sound more confident than he felt. When the plane took off, he found himself alone with two pairs of teary eyes looking up at him, waiting for guidance. A silent terror washed over him. "So, who wants ice cream?" was all he could manage to say. The following months were a baptism by fire. The routine of a full-time single father was a chaos of hurried mornings, homework, scraped knees, and nighttime fevers. His once pristine penthouse was now a noisy, messy playground. But amidst the chaos, he found a purpose he had never known. He discovered he was capable of making pancakes shaped like superheroes, that he knew how to tell bedtime stories with different voices, and that a child's hug could cure the exhaustion of any day. When Chloe returned to Boston for a visit, she found a transformed man, and she found children who, despite missing her, were secure and happy. The conversation about the future was different. There were no more accusations, just two people trying to find the best solution for their unique family. They agreed to try a shared custody arrangement, with her spending extended periods in Boston. The process to add Julian's name to the birth certificates was initiated. On a sunny afternoon, months later, in the same Boston Common where it all began again, Julian watched his children play. Liam, the natural leader. Olivia, the fearless adventurer. They were his, legally, emotionally, undeniably his. He felt a peace that no professional achievement had ever given him. He had made mistakes, lost precious years, but now he was determined to get it right. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Chloe, who was in Vancouver. "Bought my ticket, arriving Friday. Can't wait to see you guys." He smiled, put the phone away and stood up. It was time to join the game, to be an active part of the moment, not just an observer. The future was still uncertain, but the present, chasing his children in a sun-drenched park, was perfect. Did this story make you think? What's the biggest lesson you took away from it? Share it with us in the comments. And for more narratives that inspire us to be better, click that subscribe button and join our community.